Hey everybody, Matt from Pure Intentions Coffee coming at you from the Pure Intentions Cold Brew facility here, North Tryon Street. We're going to be talking today about cold brew production, a little bit specifically about how we've developed our cold brew production over the years, as well as just some general sensory research and development stuff. And we're here to also take your questions about cold brew and what the best practices are. We'll also talk about some safety standards and health standards that you guys can keep an eye out for as you're out in the world looking to buy your own cold brew products. So thanks for joining. We're going to have some fun over the next 30 minutes. And if anybody has any questions, there's a little comment box down at the bottom. Feel free to type any questions that you have, and hopefully I'll notice them and we'll get those questions answered. So I hope everybody's Friday is off to an awesome start, and let's have at it. So if you're familiar with our cold brew products, we've got three. You can see the Nitro here and our Classic here, and we just came out with the lightly caffeinated here. The cool part about these is you're able to really enjoy them on the go. It's super clean energy. It's really just coffee, water, and liquid nitrogen is all that's in there. We don't do any sweeteners or preservatives or anything like that, and we'll get into why shortly. So familiar with our stuff, you can see those cans there. So let's talk a little bit about what cold brew is and how it differentiates itself from other cold coffee beverages. I remember back when we first started making cold brew a very long time ago. I think at this point it's probably been about 6 years. Cold brew didn't really have its own definition at the time. There was a lot of confusion about what iced coffee was versus cold brew, and luckily, the popularity of cold brew over the years has allowed us to create more of a separate type of product for it. So specifically for us, the way that we make it here, cold brew is cold water and coffee mixed together and steeped for a 24-hour period. The finished product is then filtered and extracted, re-diluted to drinking strength, and packaged. So for us, the difference is we don't flash brew or flash chill hot coffee. We don't take hot coffee and put it over ice. It is physically a cold brewed product using only cold water, and is chilled throughout its production life cycle, as well as after production. We keep it refrigerated. So if you guys have ever heard of the flash chilled products, that's where they physically make hot coffee and put either a chilling coil or some other way of cooling that hot coffee down immediately to then create a cold product. For us, the considerations of why we make cold brew versus flash chilled really goes to taste. I have always been a firm believer that cold brew coffee has a smoother, easier to drink profile than flash chilled coffee. The physical stuff that comes out of the coffee when you're making it with hot coffee is different than when you're using just cold water. So the chemical reactions that are happening to the coffee itself and the soluble compounds that are in the coffee and being pulled out of it when you're using hot water and flash chilling it are different than when you're using just cold water. So the flash chill process is certainly a lot easier, and you have to use less coffee. So it's from a business perspective, it's more profitable to do. But in our testing and all the work that we've ever done, the flash chilled product, it doesn't last quite as long. It has a much steeper degradation curve from a taste perspective. So we've always just stuck with cold brewing with cold water. There's a lot of stuff out there these days about vacuum brewing or pressure brewing with cold water. That's not our setup. I'll walk you through our setup here in a moment, but I think that there's a lot of development being made in the cold brew space right now. There's a lot of companies doing R&D on the physical equipment used to make cold brew, and there's a lot of ways that people are able to create it on larger scales much more quickly and efficiently. That's why you're seeing a lot of people that are able to get, like Starbucks now has a canned Nitro cold brew product. So their systems are probably much different than what you're going to see here today. So let's talk a little bit about what we've got going on behind me. So I'm going to flip the camera around and walk you through our cold brew process. Maybe I'm not going to flip the camera around. So the way that our cold brew process starts is right over here, this tank behind me. This is called our cold liquor tank. And what we do here is drop the water temperature down to 40 degrees. So before anything else happens, before the coffee ever touches the water, we already get it down to 40 degrees here. And this is done with a jacket that's inside this tank. So there's 2 layers, and in between those 2 layers, there's very, very cold glycol that's being pumped through. So we can actually get this down to 40 degrees in the matter of a couple hours from room temperature water. In Charlotte in the summer, room temperature water coming out of the tap's like 85 degrees. So we're able to actually get that 85 degree water down to 40 degrees in a couple hours, which is great. So once that water is at 40 degrees, we're ready to do what we call the drop, which is physically incorporating the coffee and the water together. So then we move over here to our mash tun. Let me see if I can get a little further away so you can see that bad boy. So you can see, so there's our cold liquor tank in the corner there, and that's our mash tun right there. This is the physical brewing device. So this is what the coffee actually sits in for 24 hours. And you can see it's on an elevated platform there, and that allows the filtration, that allows the finished product to filter down through the coffee bed. And this is actually the same thing that they use in beer brewing, but we had it customized so that the filtration on the bottom, where's the bottom right there? That filtration right there is customized for coffee, as well as the fact that it has glycol and not steam going through the jacket. So it brings the temperature down instead of raising the temperature up as you would want to do in brewing. So again, this is set to 40 degrees. So the common theme that you'll hear throughout this entire walkthrough of our brewing protocol is that we want to keep everything as consistent and as low temperature as possible. So 40 degrees, that's our sweet spot. The water and the cold brew product will always stay at 40 degrees. So let's walk over here and see what we got in the mash tun. Whoop. So this guy, you'll be able to see there's a rake in here, trying to give you the best view possible. So that rake allows the coffee and the water to incorporate a little bit easier as we're dumping the coffee in the top of the tank. This door obviously would be closed, otherwise it would be very messy. So close the door, start pumping the water in from the cold liquor tank, and as the water is coming through here, we're dumping coffee in this closed vessel, and it sits right on top of this filtration platform here. So this is a false bottom that allows the coffee to create a bed and allows for the water and the coffee to stay in the same level during the brewing process. Let's come out and take a look at what that looks like from the top. So now looking down through the top of the mash tun, we can see the rake, the water. We actually pump our water through the Vorlauf port, which is up here, which actually spreads the water out across the coffee bed a little more evenly. And we also actually come up here and stir manually as well. So the rakes aren't quite strong enough to do it all by itself. So as the water is being pumped in, we're standing up on the top and stirring with a paddle as well. So the end result is, it kind of looks like brownie mix. The end result is this really, really nice creamy mixture of our single origin Mexico from Veracruz. The La Laja gang makes a really great honey processed Mexico that we use for our cold brew. So as we're dropping that in and stirring it up, it's becoming really nice and incorporated. And what we're trying to avoid, and this actually goes for anybody that makes cold brew at home, you want to try and avoid any dry pockets or dough balls. You want to really break up the coffee as you're incorporating the water. Don't just dump a bunch of coffee into whatever water you're using to make your cold brew and walk away. So it's just like hot coffee. You want to make sure that all of the grounds are being wet, and we do that with a combination of these rakes. Where am I? Whoop, there we go. These rakes as well as a paddle. Cool. So, and again, just for anybody that's joined, if you have any questions as we're going along, just type them down in the comment box at the bottom of the live stream. Once this device is full, we actually use about 300 pounds of coffee to 300 gallons of water for one batch of coffee. Once all 300 gallons of water are in there and 300 pounds of coffee are in there and everything is nice and happy and incorporated, we close everything up, turn the rakes off, and let it sit for 24 hours, still with that glycol pumping through the jacket, so it stays at 40 degrees consistently. Once we're ready to extract everything out of there, we actually do an extra layer of filtration. So we use the coffee bed itself to act as almost like a sediment layer filtration. what ends up happening is we hook our pump up to this Vorloff port here and pump all of the, where am I? There we go. That Vorloff port right there. And what this does is pull the liquid off the bottom of the tank. And that liquid has a ton of sediment in it. So if we just tried to come at it and start after that 24-hour period and start pulling liquid off the bottom of the tank, it would have so much sediment that all of our filters would just be immediately clogged. So what we do to combat that is, again, we use the bed of coffee itself to act as the primary layer of filtration before we start pumping everything out. So this Vorloff port here, we're gonna pull out of that, and it's gonna go back up into the top of the tank and filter through the bed of coffee. So that's kind of like that's really the first step of preparation before we start pulling the finished product out. So after enough Vorloff cycle time, the finished product, you'll actually be able to see it come out of the Vorloff port on the bottom. It's like super clear, and it almost looks like the finished cold brew product that you're used to drinking right out of the can. So that the coffee bed itself does a fantastic job of acting as that primary layer of filtration. So once we're ready to actually start what we then call the pull, so we first had the drop, which is incorporating coffee and water together. Then the second step is called the pull, which is where we're pulling off that finished product and putting it in our storage tank, which, there's our storage tank here. So once we're ready to get all of the finished product from point A to point B, we start with what we call the pull again. So from that point, so I've actually got all of our hoses hooked up here, almost like a mock pull. So I'm gonna walk you through that. So once we're ready to do the pull, I'm trying to keep an eye on this so I can see what you guys are seeing here. All right, so this tank, you can see all this cool stuff on the bottom of the tank, on the bottom of the mash tun. That's where all that liquid gold comes out when we're ready to do the pull. So this big tube right here in the middle, and then the one behind it, where are we going? Right there, that one. So those two tubes are the ones that act as the primary drain tubes for the finished product. So we come out here, we come through our output port, and this is actually really important. So this sight glass here, I'm gonna see if I can get you guys a better view of this sight glass. Woo! So you can see that it's clear, hence why it's called a sight glass, because you can see through it. So that sight glass allows us to figure out how far along in the pull we are. So in the beginning, the stuff that's coming through that sight glass looks just like you would normally see your coffee in the can. It's, kind of clearish, brownish, literally looks like liquid gold. So that's great. But then as you go and as you start pulling further and further and further into the finished product that's in this tank, it starts to get cloudier and cloudier and cloudier because you're pulling more of the sediment through that coffee bed that we just talked about up there. So at the very end of the pull, you won't even be able to see through this sight glass at all. And that's, for us, is an indicator of, okay, we're getting towards the end. We need to be paying attention to our filters, and we're almost where we need to be. So we start the pull, and the liquid comes through here. Next step is, so this is our pump. So we just have this centrifugal pump here, in the bottom, out the top. We follow that over here to our first, or I guess this is our second filter. Let's see if everything's down here. So, boom, there we go. So this is our second filter. The first filter being the false bottom that's on the bottom of that mash tun. That's about 400 microns. Okay, so any sediment that is larger than 400 microns, which ground coffee is, will stay at the top of that. But when you're grinding coffee, there's a lot of extra fines that get in there. So not everything is going to be above 400 microns, regardless of how nice your grinder is. So we have this as our secondary barrel filter. So within these barrel filters, let me see if I can do this while I'm still holding the phone. All right, hang on one second. I'm gonna try and take these filters out. That was a pretty cool view. As you can tell, it's pretty hot here in the warehouse, so apologies for the sweat. All right, so this is a barrel filter. So it literally looks like a barrel, right? So this takes us down to 55 microns. So we started at 400 microns in the big mash tun with the false bottom. Next is down to 55 microns. So we have two barrels here that each have one of these. And you can see down in there, let me see if I can get there. Yeah, so it's like a sieve. There's a layer of the larger holes on the outside are actually not the filter. It's, if you can kind of see, there's a thin, it's like a wire mesh that runs around the inside of this thing, and that's the actual filter. So 55 microns is our second layer of filtration, and that's a big jump. 400 microns on the big guy down to 55 here. That's a big jump. So this thing definitely has some sediment that gets in it. This gets a lot of kind of the muddy stuff. If you've ever made cold brew at home, and or even like a French press is another great similar thing. So when you're done pouring your coffee out of the bottom of a French press, there's that kind of like muddy gunk. Or when you're done drinking your cup, that's the stuff that this really tries to get out. So we actually don't have to clean this if we do our Vorlauf right. So remember, we always do the Vorlauf first, which is using the coffee as a bed of sediment to create that first layer of filtration. Super cool. You're using the product itself to do what you need it to do. We actually don't really have too many problems with this. Every now and again, if we have an issue with the Vorlauf or an issue with the first filtration, we'll have to stop and clean these filters halfway through the pull. But for the most part, we don't ever have to clean these during a pull. At the end, they're definitely pretty packed and we have to clean them out, but that's what they're there for. So once we have that secondary layer of filtration, you guessed it, we have a third one. It's like, what's that vodka that's triple distilled? This isn't distilled, but it's triple filtered, which is great. So this is our last filter, this stand-up guy here. I'm kind of a stand-up guy myself, but this stand-up guy here is what we call our polish filter. I got to toss out a thank you to the Modern Times folks, because when we did a tour of their facility out in San Diego, California, this was very similar to, where am I? There we go. This was very similar to, if not the same filter that they use or used to use back in the day. I think that was probably like 5 years ago. So thanks to them. We love this guy. So what this does, where am I? Here we go. So let me see if I can, again, this is very hard to do with only one hand. I've never had to do any exercises with this cold brew equipment with only one hand. I'm going to show you the inside of this thing. Getting there. What coffee do you use for your cold brew? So we use a single origin coffee from Veracruz, Mexico, specifically from Huatusco. It's from Café La Laja is the provider. It's a family farm. They're actually very similar in operation to Finca Churumpampa. If you guys are familiar with our coffees at all, you'll know how proud we are of our direct trade relationship in Peru. So Finca Churumpampa is a family farm, but they also buy coffee from other smaller farmers in the area and help them improve their quality. So Finca La Laja out of Mexico is very similar. They have their own farms, but also purchase coffee cherries and parchment from other farmers in the region. So this in particular is a regional blend from Finca La Laja that's a honey processed coffee, which we believe adds a lot of sweetness and body to the cold brew. We actually don't sell it because we like to manage our cold brew coffee inventory a little bit separately. We do, go through quite a bit of it, so it's just easier for us to manage as a cold brew only coffee. We notice a lot of cherry notes, a lot of chocolate and caramel notes, and most importantly for us, it has relatively low acidity, which I know for most folks in coffee, they want that acidity, they want that complexity, but we really believe that in cold brew, acidity is the enemy. Acidity is the first thing to die off. So you can make the best cold brew on the planet, but if it has a super high complexity and super high acid level, that's the first flavor that's going to degrade. And it's kind of like a hoppy beer. When you have old hops that have degraded in an IPA, it just has kind of an off flavor, and you're not really living up to the potential of all the ingredients that you had in there. So because we have a 90-day shelf life on our coffee, we want to use something that is really focusing and emphasizing those sweet, chocolatey notes, super smooth and creamy, and this particular coffee has all of those components without having any of that stuff that will degrade super quick. Let's see. How many gallons of cold brew do you yield per batch? Thanks, Keith. Appreciate the question. So 320 is the finished number of gallons, and as we finish our filtration discussion here, I'll describe a little bit about how we arrive at that number. So really quickly, to finish out filtration, I know you guys are super jazzed about filtration. Honestly, it was one of the hardest things for us to figure out, so I am a filter nerd. You can see in here, we have this is actually like a felt, it's a disposable felt filter. So this is what we call our polish filter. So after we had, I got to switch arms, man. This is a good workout for my shoulders. We've got our, where am I? Mash tun. Remember, 400 microns on the mash tun is our primary layer. After we do the Vorloff and use the sediment bed, secondary is 55 microns on our double barrel mesh filter. Third layer is 10 microns. 10 microns. That's tiny. That's minuscule. So this gets all of the tiny particulate, tiny sediment. You couldn't even call it mud. It's kind of it's crazy. It's just like all of the super small stuff that is in coffee when you are just directly immersing the coffee and the water together. So there's no paper filters involved in any of this. So when the coffee gets here, it still has some sediment in it, and we want to get rid of all that. So this third layer filtration is our polish filter, and that gets rid of all the other nasty bits and sediment that we don't want in our finished product. So then after that, we come, there we go, there's the thing. So we come all the way over here, and we pump it into this beast. Whoa! So that beast is our 30 barrel bright tank, which acts as our finished product storage device. All right, so Keith, more specifically to your question. We start with 300 gallons of water and 300 pounds of coffee over here. Our finished net yield of just the cold brew that comes out of this tank is about 280 gallons. Okay, so there's a little bit of a loss. Might even be a little bit less than that. So there's a little bit of a loss of product because the coffee that's in here stays wet, right? So the coffee actually soaks up some of the moisture itself. So we don't get the full 300 gallons back out of it, which is good because we brew it as a slight concentrate. So the 300 to 300 is a slight concentrate. When it makes it in here with, let's just say around about, say, 280 gallons, we then, in the meantime, have put more filtered water back in our cold liquor tank, which we use exclusively for chilling water. So we have more water in there, 100 gallons. So then we pump, so I guess 100 gallons minus, so we end up with 220. So 220 is our net yield in here of just the cold brew product. Then we pump another 100 gallons of water back into it to dilute it back to drinking strength, right? So we start with 300 in the big guy, in the mash tun, we end up with 220 here, and then add another 100 gallons to get to our finished drinking strength at 320 gallons per batch. Keith, I hope I answered your question. I kind of rambled on there for a minute. All right, so that's the process. So we have 1 filtration, 2 filtration, 3 filtration, finished product. Once it makes it into that bright tank, we can store 3 batches at a time. So 960 gallons can fit into this bright tank. Usually we'll do 2 batches and then do a big packaging run so we're not overfilling it and letting it sit there too long. It's also really hard to do 3 batches in 1 week. So usually we'll do 2 and can it or keg it. So this guy here, just to kind of finish out the process, this is our canning line. Woo. So everything starts down there. This, where are we? There we go. This is, a little further, there we go. That is our twist rinser, so that sanitizes the cans. All the cans go down that line and sanitizes the cans before they get cold brew. So you know that it's a clean can that is getting your lovely cold brew product. The cans then move down this conveyor to, where are we at? To that step. These guys here. Those are our dosing heads. So those physically go down into the can. If anybody's ever seen our canning day posts, I'm all about posting up when it's time to do some canning. So you'll see some of our stories where we're actually showing you the process of the canning line running. Then they continue, the other direction, there we go. Continue down the end of the line there to this thing there, which is the seamer. So that adds the lid. So the way that we do our nitro coffee is with that thing right there, this crazy contraption that has a bunch of cool hoses and stuff on it. That is our Nitro Doser. So if you guys ever remember in science class when you were a kid, and the science teacher put a banana in liquid nitrogen and then you could like break it with a hammer, it's that same stuff. Not a banana, but liquid nitrogen is what goes into our nitro coffee. So we hook up a very large liquid nitrogen tank to this, where am I? That hose right there. And then we're able to actually dose tiny little droplets of liquid nitrogen from this dosing head. So this thing keeps it, it's a vacuum sealed reservoir in here, so it keeps the liquid nitrogen, I think it's like negative 320 degrees or something is what nitrogen has to be at to stay in liquid form. So it keeps the liquid nitrogen in liquid form and allows it to push out through this dosing head here into the can. So that all happens in a matter of, like very, very quickly. So the can gets filled, it passes under the dosing head, little tiny droplet of liquid nitrogen gets put on the top, and as soon as that happens, it starts turning into gas. So we put a lid on it and seam it really quickly. So there's no CO2 involved. It's literally just the liquid nitrogen that gets dropped on the top of the liquid cold brew. The lid gets put on, and then that inside the can, the liquid nitrogen is turning into gas from its liquid state. So that's what actually pressurizes the can itself. There's no CO2 escaping or anything like beer. The CO2 that is inherent in the beer as it escapes, that's what fills the can and creates a pressurized beer can. For us, we use liquid nitrogen. So that's why our, the nitro version of our cold brew, coming back over here. Whoa. The nitro version of our cold brew, man, we're already at 1 o'clock. Geez, this is fun. I'm having fun. Are you guys having fun? Cool. So the nitro version of our can, if you pick it up and squeeze it next to the classic version, you'll be able to literally feel how much more pressurized it is. So nitrogen has a very hard time diffusing into liquid, just the properties of it as a gas. Carbon dioxide, on the other hand, is very easily dissolved into liquid, creating the carbonic acid effect, and that's why CO2 is has a bittering effect on drinks. Anyway, back to the story at hand. So we use liquid nitrogen. Where was I? Oh yeah. So the nitro can right there. Boop, boop, boop. The nitro can is so much more pressurized because we have to add that extra pressure in order to get the nitrogen inside the can to physically diffuse into the liquid. The classic can, that one in the middle, boop, 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 we just put a very, very, very small amount because we want it to be a still product. We want it to have no bubbles, no creamy. We want it to just be like coffee over ice, like you get an iced coffee, right? So we put a very, very tiny amount of liquid nitrogen into that can because all we're looking to do is fill the headspace and give it a nice, full can feel. Whereas on the nitro version, I'm starting to get pretty good at this pointing over my shoulder thing. The nitro version of this, where we actually want the liquid nitrogen the nitrogen itself to diffuse into the liquid. And that's what gives it that really awesome cascading, creamy texture. It adds sweetness without having any sweeteners. It adds the creaminess without having any dairy. I mean, nitrogen is just like a fantastic thing. We also breathe a lot of it too. If you don't, it's a pretty great gas. I don't know. I mean, I'm a nitrogen fan. What can I say? So the third one, where am I? Don't fail me now. There we go. Boop, boop. The lightly caffeinated, the orange salmon colored can. That one we go about halfway. So you can still, if you'd like, you can still shake it up and get the nitro effect, but you don't have to. You can just pop the top and get a classic effect out of it. So sort of a compromise, meet in the middle. It's like a family unit back there, 1, 2, 3. So so that's our cold brew process from A to Z. So one of the things, I'm gonna come over here and sit down. So one of the things that I wanted to chat with you guys about, it is 1 o'clock. So I'll first of all just say thanks to everybody for joining and for the questions that we got. If anybody has any questions that's joined recently, just type them down in the comment section on the bottom. Hold on, is this oh, there you go. We do have, there's actually, does anybody know this? There's actually a question section. Wow, okay, so I think I answered both of those questions. That's cool, I'll have to start using that. There's actually a question collector in Instagram Live, that's pretty cool. Anyway, now that I know about that, you can either use the question collector or the comment section to ask your questions. So if you're just joining us, we're talking through the whole nitro, or I guess cold brewing process, all the way up through the nitro process of how we package it. The last thing that I'll mention about the packaging process, since there was a specific question about nitro, I think I answered it for the cans, but for the kegs, what we do, we have these large food grade. Oh, by the way, all this nitrogen is food grade, and we have the documentation to prove it. So all of these large tanks, let's see if I can, food grade additive, food additive grade, wow. Selfie stick, don't fail me now. All right, So we use pressurized gassed nitrogen. So we actually turn the pressure way up. We turn the pressure way up and pressurize the kegs with high pressure gas nitrogen. So there's no liquid nitrogen used in the keg process. So I believe that I answered all the questions that were in the question box. Please feel free to write more if you do have more. The thing that I wanted to chat with you guys about, so for anybody that likes to make their own cold brew at home, I want to describe a little bit about our research and development and all of the crazy stuff that we went through to arrive at our cold brew flavor profile. I feel like people dismiss cold brew as a easy to make product. You can pretty much throw any crap coffee and it'll taste fine in cold brew because all you're doing is like mixing it up and letting it sit in your fridge. I'm here to dispel those rumors. So when we decided to create this product, so back in the day, probably 5 years ago, that was our, that's what we did. Like any coffee that we had left over, had roasted too much of, this is back, a long time ago. We got standards now, guys. We would literally just we would try a bunch of different coffees and, see what we liked, and very little consistency to it. We didn't really monitor how much we were stirring the coffee. We were using room temperature water to start with and then tossing it in the fridge. So when we bought all this equipment, all this lovely stuff in this area that you're seeing around me, when we bought all this equipment, we decided to do a bunch of research and development. So on a small scale, we took commercial toddy filters, which are these guys. It's like a dry hop bag, but it has a paper filter that goes inside of it. So we made 2-gallon batches, and we had a control batch. And we did it like super scientific. Like we had a control batch and then changed variables as we went. So, for example, on one, we did a control batch and then the grind size, we did slightly finer, slightly coarser. And then we, did our brew cycle, extracted all the coffee, and then did a blind tasting of all those and rated them and did a formal sensory analysis on all of them. Then we picked another variable, had our control batch. Turbulence, let's say this time. So we would take a paddle, stick it down in the 2 gallons and like really whip it around. And then the other one, we wouldn't touch. And the control batch, was like our standard. We did the same, obviously that's why it's called a control batch. We did the same thing every time. So turbulence was another variable that we tested. Coffee type and roast degree was another variable that we tested, which is where we arrived at our acid conclusion. So if you guys were not on this earlier, we concluded that acidity in cold brew was great on day 1, but by day 7, it had degraded significantly enough that the flavor profile was not the same any longer. So we wanted to take that variable out of the equation. We want our coffee to taste just as good on day 1 out of this guy right here as it does on day 90. So once, we did, I don't know, I think it was probably like 3 weeks worth of tasting and variable changing and sensory analysis. We came to all these conclusions about how we wanted to operate our cold brew process, and then we translated that onto a production batch size. So all that to say, you guys that are making cold brew at home, all of those same things should be taken into consideration. So don't just go pick up any old dirt cheap coffee and think that, cold brew doesn't matter. Cold brew matters. And everything that you do to change a variable in your cold brew process will have an effect on your finished product. And again, apologies for the sweat. I appreciate you guys, bearing with me here. Do you see what we go through to make great cold brew for you guys? Sweating it out. Let's see here. Hey Sam, how are you? Was the new lightly caffeinated cold brew blended with decaf Calma to make it less caffeinated? Oh, we got the heavy hitter questions. From somebody that knows the deal. All right. So how do we make our lightly caffeinated cold brew? Yes. So the lightly caffeinated cold brew is made with 50% decaf and 50% Mexico La Laja. And the decaf is actually a water processed decaf from Mexico as well, with a very similar flavor profile. So we really lucked out that we already had an amazingly sweet and chocolatey decaf to complement our amazingly sweet and chocolatey Café La Laja honey processed single origin. So those two, their powers combined, they create a 50% caffeinated product. So one other thing I'll mention about caffeine, the lightly caffeinated has about 120 milligrams per can, which is about the same as a standard cup of coffee. The classic and nitro both clock in at about 340 milligrams per can, which sounds like a lot, because it is a lot, but if you ever notice that you get like a pretty stiff buzz off of those cans, that they do, they're pretty caffeinated, they're up there. So the reason that we did it that way was based on our research. We're like kind of right in the middle of the canned cold brew caffeine content. Say that 10 times fast. Canned cold brew caffeine content, spectrum. So there's some of our major competitors have as much as 550 milligrams of caffeine per can, which is freaking insane. Not dropping any names, but you guys have Google. So some of our competitors have like 550 milligrams of caffeine, and some of them only have, specifically the folks that do flash chilled cold brew will have, about 150 milligrams per can. So we felt like 340 was right in the middle, and it allows people that want to get that like nitro kick, they'll get the caffeine that they want, but it's not like crazy over the top at the top end of the spectrum. So that's a little bit about caffeine. So we are after 1 o'clock. We're at 1:07. Any last questions? I really appreciate you guys joining. If you missed anything that came up here, we're going to be posting this on our Instagram TV channel as well as our YouTube channel. So go give us a subscribe on YouTube and check out the beginning portions of this. So that's Cold Brew in a nutshell. Thanks, everybody. I'm not seeing any other questions come through. I really appreciate your time, and enjoy our fine cold brew products at many of your local retailers. Thanks, everybody. Matt from Pure Intentions Coffee signing out.